The IEP is an integral part of special education. I'd like to give you a quick overview from my professional perspective. Don't stress out about getting down a lot of these ideas or taking notes. I have visually represented the most important parts of this on the slides that immediately follow this. There's about 4 or 5 slides. The first of which are review. If you'll remember that circular graph, the timeline from last week, it comes from our Kent ISD parent guide about IEPs. We're jumping in this week at step number 4. Assuming that there's been a referral, there's been evaluation, and the team decided that yes, this student is eligible and has a diagnosis of a disability because that student needs more. This is kind of what happens when the team determines that the student needs more. We're jumping in at step 4 this week, which is the IEP. We found the student eligible. And step number 5 is the actual IEP meeting, development of the IEP and the IEP meeting, where a team of people come together to collaborate to put together a yearly program for a student with a disability. Step 6 is the annual review, that a student with a disability who has an IEP has their IEP reviewed on a yearly basis. And then step number 7 is the 3-year re-eval. So after an initial IEP, every student is reevaluated every 3 years. And that is a review of the existing data, determining if more data is needed, and then the cycle continues. That's an easy visual to remember, and it also points to the complexity of the IEP process. The IEP is guided by many laws, regulations. It's grounded with high quality instruction and really access for all students to general education. When we determine that a student needs more help, that falls federally under IDEA. And I want to quickly review the 6 expectations, the 6 principles from IDEA, and how that connects to your role as a general education teacher. There were 6, and this week we're really going to dive into number 3, which is general educators are critical members of the IEP team. The IEP plan is centered around access to general education environment through content, curriculum, standards, and skills. There are a couple of other important terms in IDEA for the roles and expectations of general education teachers. One of your roles is to provide data and observations for the evaluation team. That's steps 1 through 3 on that cycle. Be an advocate for least restrictive environments. Many times those are determined and outlined in IEPs and IEP team meetings. Support the implementation of the IEP through supplementary aids or services or accommodations. Those are documented in the IEP and discussed at the meeting. And also be a part of evaluating the student's progress. Again, you'll see that represented throughout. So it is accurate to say that the 6 principles of IDEA are reflected heavily in the IEP document itself, but also then in the roles for educational professionals as they work with that student throughout that year, that cycle for that program. Once we know that a student needs more and they're diagnosed as eligible with a disability and eligible for special education services, that means that they need specially designed instruction and related services that meet their unique needs. Then it's necessary to allow them to have access to the general education curriculum. The IEP tells this story. It's your plan book. It's your guidebook for moving forward with that student and how to make sure that the barriers that exist are something that the team and the student can work through. An important part to remember are the supplemental aids and services. And in about 3 slides, I've put together a chart where you think about the differences between supplemental aids and services and that specially designed instruction. Specially designed instruction is kind of special ed. It's what the teacher does. It's changes or additions to the general education curriculum. We can present that through content, method, delivery of instruction, services, and it's mostly provided by special educators. Supplemental aids, services, accommodations, and modifications are what those things that a student needs. Very similar, it's very simplified, but very similar to me needing these glasses to be able to see. It's what the student needs. It supports access to the general education curriculum. We think about them as presentation, response, timing, scheduling, settings. Sounds very familiar to UDL from our past modules. And those are provided by all teachers and staff members in a school. There is a difference between an accommodation and a modification. If you think about the definitions of those very words, an accommodation is a change. It is a slight, it's a change, but it's how students access information and the way they demonstrate learning. They don't substantially, deeply change what is being taught. They're made in order to kind of provide equal access. So think about, back to UDL, think about a curb cut. That is a cut in the curb, so strollers, luggage, wheelchairs, those kinds of things can use a sidewalk. That's an accommodation. Modifications are deep changes in what students are expected to learn. Those are alternate standards, alternate curriculums, reducing expectations for assessing and grading, deeper cuts into the what students are learning. I think it is a common error to sometimes jump right to a modification for a student when we have not yet maxed out those supplementary aids and services. Presuming confidence or presuming competence and making sure that we've tried all our tools and all the things that are handy to us first before we make deep changes and radically alter the experience that the student has when accessing the general education curriculum. Take a look at the next few slides, and then we'll jump into part 2. Make sure you've read the required reading, which are parts of chapter 4 from our course text and parts of that Kent ISD parent guide. Those will be essential for completing your assignments for this week.